Welcome into the Sunday Belt Football Podcast, presented to you by Satisfied Food Co. Quality handmade pimento cheese and different dishes for your tailgate needs. Check out Satisfied Food Co. on Facebook. I know I'm kind of a rookie, so I go with the gentleman, is what they call. Robbie, you like jalapenos in your pimento cheese? You like a little bit spicier, or you just like the straight up old school pimento cheese?
I like old school. There's no need to mess with anything when it comes to pimento cheese. If you want to go spicy, you just go elsewhere. Pimento cheese just needs to be regular old pimentos, cheese, all mixed together, thrown on a cracker, or whatever vehicle you want.
I was going to say, how do you consume your pimento cheese?
I'm a Triscuit kind of guy.
Oh,
or wheat thin. I'm not a big pimento cheese sandwich. I just like it I like to dip it and use that.
I like the Captain's kind of wafer crackers.
Okay.
And kind of soft crackers with the pimento cheese. I think that's the best way to do it. Again, recapping Week 8 in the Sun Belt. Georgia Southern shocking. Troy coming up with another big win. They're kind of on a roll here, 4 wins in a row. But I want to start with a little exercise, Robbie.
Okay.
It's going to go like this. Yeah, nah. Or nah, yeah. I'm going to present to you something, just a thought from the weekend. You're going to tell me, nah, yeah, that's right. Or yeah, nah, I'm not feeling it. So I'm going to start with this. App State can still win the Sun Belt. And I say can, and I believe probably when we get to the end of the season are going to be there. So App State can still win the Sun Belt.
Yeah, nah. Yeah, nah.
Not feeling it?
Nah.
They have so much, again, I think they're playing 3 out of the 4 teams that they need to play are still on this, or need to beat, that are in front of them, are still on their schedule. So they control that destiny. And then the team that's in front of them that they're not playing, James Madison, isn't eligible for postseason play. So I'm thinking App State still going to have something to say when it's all said and done.
Potentially. I mean, I'm not counting them out, but they have a big hill to climb, no pun intended, being up in Boone in the mountains. And they got a layup this coming week against Robert Morris, which they should get really well against. But the way they ran the football Wednesday night against Georgia State was very impressive. They seem to be getting healthier now. But to go to Coastal, it's a tough place to play. To go to Marshall, a tough place to play. Then you have Old Dominion at home, and then to go to Georgia Southern Thanksgiving weekend, a rivalry game, a tough place to play. If Georgia Southern is still in the mix, which is possible, if they're still in the mix, that game the Saturday after Thanksgiving could be bonkers in Statesboro. Appalachian, yes, we saw, again, we talked about it. They are 2 plays away from really being 2-4 now, instead of what are they? I know they're 3-3, or they're 4-3, but you take 2 of those wins away on the last second at Troy.
Yeah,
and then the A&M makes an extra play here and there, and you're looking at 2-5 or 2 and I can't do math. Yeah, they're 2-5. Yeah, 2-5 equals 7. 4-3 equals 7. Yeah, they're 2-5. But also, if they get a break against North Carolina and catch a 2-point conversion, they're 5-2, and hold on to a 28-3 lead at home against James Madison. They're 6-1. So it just depends on who is going to show up in terms of Appalachian. And I'm not even going to try to explain the Texas State debacle, because that still is one of the biggest head scratchers that I've seen in the history of the Sun Belt. But I'm sticking with yay nah because of the road games that they have to go to still.
Cameron Peoples feels like when he's on, that team might be might be the best in the Sun Belt. 23 carries, 168 yards, and 2 touchdowns against Georgia State. Again, you look at the rest of their schedule: Coastal Carolina coming up, then you have Old Dominion on the 19th and Georgia Southern on the 26th. Those are the teams that they need to take out if they want to play in the Sun Belt Championship. It's all still out there for them. I think they're going to have something to say at the end of it. All right. Yeah,
but wait a minute, hang on. Look at Marshall, though. I mean, Marshall, too, still has something to say because Huntington's not an easy place to play either, especially if the Thundering Herd is still going to be interested in playing for the Eastern title.
It's not, but I still feel like with Chase Bryce, with Cameron Peoples, I think that's the team to beat. And in my mind, still in the East. Switching over to the West. Troy's defense is the best in the Sun Belt. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, South Alabama, 222 points on the season coming in. They get held to what, 6?
Yep.
On Saturday, Troy.
And I believe coming off of a bye week for the Jaguars as well.
Yeah. They played UL Monroe. No, they beat UL Monroe on the 15th, and then they played Thursday night. So a week before they had the bye week, but when they had a week in between Louisiana and Monroe. But yeah, I mean, South Alabama, I thought was just going to coast to the Western title once they got past Monroe and Louisiana, kind of the sticking point the last couple of years. And then Troy just said, not so fast. We're going to slow you down, shut you down. And, it wasn't pretty, but defense wins games. They won 10-6, and they didn't need to score more than 10 points, obviously. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think Troy does have the best defense thus far that we've seen in the Sun Belt. It'll be tested maybe against Georgia Southern in a couple of weeks. But the rest of their schedule, South Alabama, Southern Miss, Texas State, Old Dominion, they should ease into the Western Championship.
Yeah, they're the first team in the Sun Belt to 4 conference wins there. And if you look at their schedule, they were never really in it against Ole Miss, but also held Ole Miss to just 28 points in Oxford. And then the only other loss on the season thus far for the Trojans, that Hail Mary against App State. So, yeah. They are a knockdown away on a Hail Mary pass from being potentially the G5 candidate to go play in a New Year's Six Bowl if they'd run the table and win out. But now I think with 2 losses, you're just fighting for better bowl seating after that, but still fighting for a conference championship there for Troy, when I think a lot of people kind of buried them after that App State loss. 2 losses early in the season. It's just human nature for us to start burying people. And I think a lot of people do that to the Trojans, but they're on a 5-game win streak. During that stretch, they're giving up just 12.8 points per game. And so far this season have only given up 100 yards rushing twice. One of them was to Ole Miss, who's number 3 in the country in rushing per game. And the other one was to App State, who ranks inside the top 30 nationally in rushing. So, that defense for Troy is legit.
Yeah, it is. And they don't do it pretty. 10-6, 17-14, 27-20, 34-27, 16-7 in their 5-game winning streak. It's not pretty offensively, but they're getting the job done, and it's kind of like a workman-like effort. Take your lunch pail to work. The defense says, hey, we got you. Y'all don't need to score but 10 points. We got you. And I like that.
They're going to need a score going forward, but still, it's been really fun to watch this defense, and they've kind of carried them to where they are now, because that offense is not very good for the Trojans. All right, yeah. Georgia Southern can still play for a Sun Belt championship.
Yeah. And it's not because I, am who I am or what I do, but this Clay Helton thing, the stadium last week in Statesboro was electric with James Madison. They go up 10 in the fourth quarter. We've been here before against Coastal. And then here comes James Madison, takes a 1-point lead, 38-37. And that was okay, well, that's it. But they come back down the field, take the lead, and then the defense saves them in the end. And then yesterday against Old Dominion, they run the football and run it and run it and run it and run it and run it.
Yeah, over 220 yards, 3 touchdowns. Yeah. Yeah,
and Kyle Van Treese, he threw for 8,000 yards against James Madison, but then yesterday, 22 of 27, his most efficient day as the signal caller for Georgia Southern, 192 yards and a touchdown. And then Jalen White, 138 yards, Gerald Green, 91 yards, a great 1-2 punch. I'm not going to say thunder and lightning because they're both kind of lightning-esque. They're not really, one's not bigger than the other type situation. But then you had the very balanced receiving between Amari Jones, Caleb Hood, and Jeremy Singleton, who in the spring game, I said, look out for him. He's the transfer from Houston that came over, and he made some spectacular plays in the spring game, kind of quiet in the first 3 or 4. But here lately, he scored that opening touchdown against Georgia State on that long 65-yard pass to start that game. He made some key plays against James Madison, and then 6 catches, 44 yards yesterday. The receiving core, everybody thought coming into the season the running back room was going to be the strongest, but that receiving room now with Amari Jones, Caleb Hood, Derwin Burgess also, who only had 1 catch yesterday, and then Singleton, and then Jalen White catching the ball out of the backfield too. It's going to be tough. I'm not going to lie because, Georgia Southern has the off week, and then South Alabama is going to be tough on November 5th, and then a Thursday, quick turnaround Thursday to Louisiana, which even though Louisiana's down, Louisiana has given Georgia Southern fits the last couple of years.
I think Louisiana's finding their stride too.
A little bit, yeah.
We'll talk about them here in a minute.
But then you have 2 former SoCon rivals coming to Statesboro the 2 weekends to close out the regular season. And if things go, they have to fall differently because if you look at the standings, a lot of things are going to have to happen. Coastal's going to have to lose 2 more times. Georgia State's going to have to lose 1 more time in order for Georgia Southern to even have an opportunity to win out and win the East. But I do think that Georgia Southern is starting to play to the potential that they can handle their own business and then be scoreboard watching for things to happen in Conway and Atlanta.
Yeah, and Coastal Carolina idle this past week. They, of course, lost to Old Dominion, got smoked by Old Dominion 49-21 last weekend. But, you look at the rest of their schedule, I don't think it's out of the question that Coastal Carolina drops 2, right? You have Marshall still on the schedule. Then they host App State. Southern Miss is all of a sudden starting to find themselves a little bit. Frank Gore Jr. Close to 100 yards this past weekend. And then they have the trip to Virginia, and then they finish out the season with James Madison, who, again, not eligible for postseason play, but that still counts as a Sun Belt game. So, if I was a betting man, I might put money on the fact that they lose at least 2 more. But that being said, Georgia Southern would still have to win out. But what I find interesting is kind of what you brought up is you have all these weapons that we've known about before. And Clay Helton came in, and he had the interesting scenario where he got to come in mid-season last year as the guy and kind of got to evaluate talent, got a jump start on recruiting and the transfer portal. That's how you're able to land a Kyle Van Treese, get him in there to the program, right? But also you can kind of start to lay the foundation for what your team to be. And I think sitting here now, 5-3, that is 3 wins above what a lot of people thought you were going to have for the season. So that brings me to our final yeah. Just 1 more win qualifying for a bowl game start of the year, that's like, oh my God, that's bliss. Give it to me. Right now, yeah. Just 1 more win for Georgia Southern. That's a disappointment.
Yeah. It'd be disappointing if they only find 1 win out of the next, out of what's left.
Bowling.
Oh yeah, I understand that. Potentially, just because you get 6 doesn't mean you automatically more likely will.
There's like 8,000 bowl games now. They're going bowling.
Yeah, they're going. But where do you want to go? You might end up in wherever. I don't want to talk bad about a bowl game, but no. I think going 1-3 in the last 4 would be a disappointment. After where they are, I think kind of 5-3 after starting 3-1 is a disappointment. At this point, but turning it around, but Coach speaks and say, well, I like where we are because we've been able to turn it around after that 2-game losing streak and win 2 in a row. I get that. But the 2 games that you lost in that 2-game in a row losing streak were very winnable games, and especially the Coastal game. You're up 10 on the road in the 4th quarter. You should hold on and win that game. And then you don't throw 5 interceptions against Georgia State. You're looking at 7-1, 6-1, 1 loss. I can't do math, but 1 loss, and and then you could start to pick apart that Birmingham game a little bit.
I still think Birmingham's like the one game you can look at this year and be like, they were just a better team that day, and UAB's a good football team.
I agree. But I mean, there were times in that game where it could have gone one way or the other, and you could be 8-0. But I'm going to say 3 plays away from being 7-1. But at this point, 5-3, you end up 6-6. I think yes, it would be a disappointment. I think you want to. I think first of all, not to talk too much about it, but the off week I think comes at a perfect time right now for Georgia Southern too, because they can kind of regroup, get a little healed, and then South Alabama is going to be a big game a week from now, and then going on the road to Louisiana too. But yeah, to answer the question, yes, it would be disappointing to finish the season at 6-6. Although still big picture, a win.
Yeah. So let's run down the schedule real quick. Just a quick refresh. Wednesday, App State takes down Georgia State 42-17. Thursday, you have Troy getting that big 10-6 win there over South Alabama. And then Saturday, the slate, UL Monroe gets obliterated by Army, which Army continuing their Sun Belt schedule. You might as well just make them an honorary member at this point. Then Marshall kills James Madison. I want to come back to that one. Georgia Southern, as we mentioned, gets the 28-23 win over Old Dominion. Louisiana finding their stride. They get the 38-18 win over Arkansas State. And then Southern Miss survives against a better Texas State team than we've seen in a little while. 20-14, Southern Miss gets the win there. But I want to go back to that James Madison game because my initial thought was, welcome to the Sun Belt, right? They had all of this pub behind them. You get into the top 25. Man, it sucks that you're not going to be able to play for a Sun Belt championships once you ultimately go undefeated at the end of the year, right? You could potentially be playing for New Year's Six Bowl, but you're not eligible. And then 2 weeks later, you have 2 Sun Belt losses. So I wanted to go, welcome to the Sun Belt, but it's another new addition that does it to them in Marshall there. But I just think it kind of goes back to what we talked about when we first did the show, talking about how they added these teams. All of these schools make so much sense. And I think if you look at the Sun Belt, I don't know top to bottom if there's a conference that's more competitive, right? Any team can beat any team on any given Saturday. I don't know if there's one like that in the rest FBS football, right? So looking at this, I want to say James Madison got sunbelted. Is it fair? Can we give that to Marshall to say they're smacking James Madison with the welcome to the Sun Belt?
Well, I look at the box score first of all, and I do not see Tony Centillo at quarterback for James Madison. I see B. Atkins, who threw 13 of 35 for 164 yards, a touchdown, and 4 picks.
Hey, this is the year of the backup quarterback, though, so you got to be able to rock.
I agree, but I'm guessing that part of the reason James Madison did not score in the second half was the absence of their starter, Tony Centillo, and I don't know what happened there. I have to look to see why he didn't play. He did not leave the game in Statesboro last week with an injury. He was there on the field at the very end. But, I would have thought maybe a little hangover from Statesboro to go to Huntington, but you were at home against Marshall. And you led that game 12-2 after the first quarter. And you led at halftime 12-9. And just kind of didn't come out for the second half. And I do think that it was fun to see James Madison 5-0, ranked number 25. Blah, blah, blah. But things have kind of corrected themselves a little bit because we have to think about the fact that they are still a transition team. Last year they were in the FCS, the CAA, the Colonial Athletic Association with what was the max for FCS, 65 scholarships, I think. Now you're up to 84. But there is a reason why there is a transition year, and they are transitioning to FBS. And so I think maybe the Cinderella slipper has fallen off a little bit. That's not to say that James Madison can't right the ship and continue to surprise people. And, they have a week off to kind of get well. They do have to go to Louisville in 2 weeks, which is probably not going to go well. And then they have, which I guess is their rivalry game in the Sun Belt against Old Dominion. It would make sense. They're in the same state. They're going to be paired with them come basketball season and baseball season and all when everybody travels to see them. and then Georgia State is a winnable game for them. And then Coastal Carolina, they could go. They still have a lot to play for, even though they can't go to a bowl game or the SEC, the SBC Eastern Division. They have a lot to play for. They can beat their in-state rival, Old Dominion. They could go host Georgia State, who has gone to a bowl game, 3, 4, 5 years in a row. They could, kind of hurt their chances to go to a bowl game, and then they could spoil Coastal Carolina's season, basically, the last week of the year in Conway. So there's a lot left to play for, but I do want to do some new digging and find out, where their starting quarterback was, because I have a feeling that led to the scoreless second half against Marshall.
Still, I mean, I know he's not able to go, but you look at, I know it's not Sun Belt, but you look at Kansas State. They went down to their third quarterback, and they were able to go toe-to-toe with TCU this past Saturday and almost upset a top 10 team. So I understand having your quarterback go out, but I mean, you were on top of the world, top 25, going to run the table in the Sun Belt and be sitting there saying, hey, we're going to hang up some banners there in our stadium. And now all of a sudden you get humbled really quickly with this Sun Belt schedule. So again, Marshall 26-12, all of a sudden they've kind of righted the ship, but a team that I want to talk about is kind of a dark horse here moving forward. Louisiana. I know it's really easy to bury teams, especially when you get that third loss of the season, but they've lost some close ones. And I really think a lot of people just kind of said, after you lose to Monroe, it's hard to take you seriously as a contender. But you look at the past couple of weeks here and you take down a Marshall team that just beat James Madison. You beat them by 10 on the road. And then all of a sudden the offense starts clicking. I know Arkansas State, Robbie, you and I could probably go out there and score at least a couple touchdowns, right, against that defense.
I'd say three.
Three. Yeah. That's fair before we both blow out both of our hamstrings.
Correct.
But you were up 38-9 in this football game. Never really close, never really in doubt. Louisiana, looking at the rest of their schedule, I think it sets up kind of nicely for them. They get a couple of tough games there against Georgia Southern and Troy, but the rest, Southern Miss and Texas State, you're going to be favored in those. So I think Louisiana is going to have something to say before it's all said and done.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they have an opportunity to beat the leader of the West in Troy, and then they can still play they lost to South Alabama, so they're going to have some help there. But Southern Miss, like you said, they're going to be favored in that. In fact, they are, because they play in 4 days. They're a 2.5-point favorite on the road in Hattiesburg on that one Thursday night. The Troy game is going to be fun to watch, but they have them at home. But then the quick turnaround, just like Georgia Southern has that tough South Alabama game on the 5th, quick turnaround to play on a Thursday night in Louisiana against Georgia Southern. You throw the Florida State game out, that's a money game. And then Texas State at home, that could be for a lot of the marbles or on the road at Texas State. That could be for a lot of the marbles for them, but they are going to need some help. But they can help themselves by beating Troy, but they're going to need some help with South Alabama. They'll help themselves by beating Southern Miss as well.
A team that I did want to talk about here, and I don't want to go to a negative note, but Georgia State. They had a brutal start to the season, right? Just the scheduling wise. You're at South Carolina, who's now a top 25 team. You host North Carolina. You take them to the brink. They're a top 25 team. And then you lose to Charlotte and lose to Coastal Carolina to start 0-4 before bouncing back with consecutive wins against Army and Georgia Southern. But then this past week, all positive momentum just gets put down the drain when you get obliterated by a good App State team, but not the same App State team that we've seen in recent years. You get beat 42-17 and just look completely inept on offense. I'm looking at the rest of their schedule, man. You got Old Dominion this week, Southern Miss, Monroe, James Madison, and Marshall. There's a chance Georgia State's a 3-4 win team this season, and you can point at the schedule all you want to, but that's disappointing, and that gets to the point where you're saying, what do we want to be as a football program?
Well, let's talk about this. Georgia State was up 14-0 in the game that they lost 42-17 on Wednesday night against App State. Tucker Gregg is 43 yards away from being the all-time leading rusher at Georgia State. He ran the ball beautifully in the first quarter and scored a touchdown and then disappeared in the second quarter. I thought he was hurt. When he came back in the third quarter, I scratched my head. I was like, wait a minute. Why is he coming back now? No mention of injury, nothing. It's just like he took, hey, coach, I'm take a quarter off. Or Sean Elliott said, hey, just take the quarter off. You're running really good. Let's just take a quarter off. and went away from it. Darren Granger, 9 of 23 for 73 yards. Some weeks he looks like Charlie Ward and a Heisman Trophy winner. Other weeks he doesn't. It's very confusing when you watch Georgia State play because, as you said, they did what they did against Georgia Southern. They did what they did against Army, which Army hadn't lost, and, of course, they were a play away from beating North Carolina. They were 2 block punt for touchdowns away from being a one-possession game against South Carolina. Inexplicably, they gave Charlotte their only win of the season, and they consequently fired their coach today or yesterday. Charlotte's 1-7, and somehow they beat Georgia State on the road there. And then they go to App and in control of the game up 14-0. And then just go away from Tucker Gregg and end up losing 42-17. And like you said, Old Dominion coming to Atlanta Saturday, going on the road to Southern Miss, Monroe in Atlanta, on the road to James Madison and Marshall to finish the year. I mean, I don't know if there may be one more win in there when Monroe coming to Atlanta, but I don't see many more.
Again, I know you can look at it and say, hey, we kind of did the Kent State thing where we scheduled the brutal schedule at the start, make some money, but eventually you got to look and say, okay, if we're going to lose those games, then we need to be competitive enough to compete in our division, and that just hasn't been the case so far. Again, you have the crazy amount of turnovers for Georgia Southern in that game there in Atlanta. If that doesn't happen, then all of a sudden you're looking at a 1-win Georgia State team.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's good enough regardless of how tough this schedule is. So a tough start there in Atlanta for Georgia State. Maybe they can bounce back. Certainly not going to a bowl game this year. But looking at it, I got to start to think that's a little bit inexcusable for the folks up there at Georgia State. All right. Taking a look at next week, it's a little bit of a limited slate. You have some teams on a bye week, but I think game of the week pretty clearly, Coastal Carolina 6-1 overall, 3-1 inside the Sun Belt. They head up to take on Marshall, who's 1-2 in the Sun Belt. And if they want to start their comeback push here, like, they play outstanding against the really good teams.
Yeah.
And then for whatever reason, they fall off when they're playing the teams that they're supposed to beat. They're 1-2 right now. And if they want to start getting this ball moving to hopping back and trying to compete there for a Sun Belt championship, it's got to start this week. Coastal Carolina, last time they went out and played, got obliterated by Old Dominion. Now they're going to play a really physical football team in Marshall. I think this is dangerous.
When you look at it, Marshall's 1-0 in the division, and that really is all that matters in the end. They have the rest of the division games ahead of them. Coastal Carolina going to go in there, a long road trip. You're in the mountains of West Virginia is a long way from the beaches of South Carolina, I can promise you. And the people in Marshall, they're going to be loud and they're going to be vocal. Saturday night at 7:00 is going to be a loud environment in Huntington, West Virginia. Marshall, a 2.5-point favorite there. And then Marshall goes to Old Dominion and then has Appalachian and Georgia Southern back-to-back before they host Georgia State. So Marshall not quite out of the picture here to host a conference championship game, something that they've become accustomed to, especially in their years in the MAC, hosting December games for a conference championship. Also looking to be bowl eligible as well. And they are really in the catbird seat. I mean, they are in the driver's seat and control their own destiny more so than anybody else in the East, really, now that you look at it, other than maybe Coastal, because Coastal can pretty much write their path as well. But you're right. This is the game of the week. Only 5 games on the slate with Louisiana going to Southern Miss. And I keep thinking that Southern Miss is going to jump up and pop somebody at some point, but they don't yet. They are 4-3, but that's going to be interesting Thursday night. Louisiana, 2.5-point favorite on the road there. Georgia State and Old Dominion. Georgia State, a 3.5-point favorite at home on Saturday. Robert Morris, who I think is in the Big South, that's Appalachian's FCS game, second.
I think they're winless. Yeah.
Yeah, it's their second FCS because they beat Citadel earlier. So 2 FCSs on the schedule for App. And then Arkansas State and South Alabama. South Alabama needs to not get tripped up in this one. They're a 10-point favorite on the road.
They need a get-right game, and I think Arkansas State's a good get-right game.
Yeah. But they need to let it be a trap game.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like Alabama against Mississippi State. It's hard to have a trap game after you get beat, especially only putting up 6 points. So I think if you're looking for a good bet in the Sun Belt next week, take South Alabama over Arkansas State because they got some anger issues to work out. Just going back quickly to that Coastal Carolina Marshall game. The last 3 games for Coastal Carolina, they're 2-1, but very close games, right? You had the Georgia Southern game, the Monroe game, and then getting obliterated by Old Dominion. Against Georgia Southern, you give up 170 yards on the ground. Against Louisiana Monroe, you gave up 150. And then you get to Old Dominion, you give over 300 yards on the ground. You think you want to get that or you make that better against Marshall? Good luck. Thundering Herd averaging over 200 yards a game on the ground. That's a team that wants to run the football. That's something to watch. I think Coastal Carolina for the past few years is used to being the team that dominates in that statistic. For whatever reason, I think they might be leaning a little bit on the arm of Grayson McCall versus his legs a little bit this year. They have not been dominating in the run game like they have in the past. Say, watch out for the Thundering Herd on the ground.
Yeah, and I'm looking up here, but I think Marshall is the only team in the Sun Belt that has a 1,000-yard rusher in Kalon Laybourne so far. He's run it 188 times for 1,002 yards. I think he is the first Sun Belt player to eclipse the 1,000-yard rushing mark. And so, yeah, Marshall's going to want to run the football. Coastal apparently does not like to tackle running football teams here lately. And so that's the key. And again, it's going to be cold. It's going to be at night in Huntington. Marshall would love nothing more than to run the football, shorten the game, and get a W and call it a day.
It's going to be interesting. I know a lot of Eagles fans, a lot of other teams in the East are going to be paying attention to that one, rooting for Marshall because they need Coastal Carolina to fall back to the pack. That's going to be a big one. A lot of big games coming up this weekend. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us tonight. If you missed any portion of it, you can check the show out on YouTube or you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Just look up the Sunday Belt Football Podcast. Robbie, it's been fun. We'll do it again next week. I know for you, probably hoping to talk about a Georgia Southern bye week this week.
Yeah.
But you could still win if Coastal Carolina loses. So
absolutely
hopefully talking about that theoretical win.
There you go.
Little Schadenfreude for Robbie Ross. We'll catch up with everyone next time. Again, presented to you by Satisfied Food Co. Appreciate everyone hanging out with us. We'll talk to you after week 9.